Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Writers Workshop. I'm very excited to welcome back instructor and local poet Jim O'Brien, who's here to share some of his creative writing techniques with us tonight. Jim, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Salam. Thank you all for being here. We had a little rain, but I appreciate you making it through that. As Salam said, my name is Jim. It's up there somewhere. And can I ask what your names are? I know Sheila. And are you Jane? Welcome. And you?
I'm Ruth.
Ruth. I've seen you here before too, I think. A couple of years ago? No.
I look like everyone.
I get a lot. I get that. And your name? Yolanda. First names only is fine. In case, so I can answer questions as you have them. In the stripes? Share, welcome. And Rachel, hello. So I'm just going to share some stuff about creative writing and creative living and how we make it through this world as it is. As Salam said, I'm a poet primarily. I had the CU Poetry Group for 6 years. We met here every week, and then the pandemic kind of changed that. So then it went to Zoom, and now it's coming back. Also involved with the Illinois State Poetry Society. Helped establish a chapter in Champaign because for years their central chapter was in Pontiac, which isn't very close to central Illinois. Also want to say we have a full writers workshop series that Salam has put on. So when you registered for this one, you probably saw the other ones. Highly recommend taking in as many of those as you can. Next week, John Milas will be here with Writer's Block, and I signed up for that one, so hopefully it goes on. We also have a monthly open mic now at the Rose Bowl in Urbana. If you ever want to get your writing out and have it heard, whether it's poems or a story or creative writing or a phone book, whatever, just come on out. It's generally the first Tuesday of each month, but please check their schedule because if they have a name act or a Nashville songwriter, they may bump us to another day in that first week. So how many of you are writing now? Kind of have been getting back to it, got away from it. I took a long break when the stay-at-home kicked in, but it was good, it was healthy. So why do we write? What's our motivation? I saw this from an online friend of mine, actually just yesterday, I think that was. So why do we write? Well, the news is everything is bad. The poets say, okay, but what if everything is bad and we still fall in love with the moon and learn something from the flowers? Or have stories to write and stories to tell. So in spite of what's going on around us, we can still find that place to take things in or keep things out and find our art and a way to get our words on the paper. You can write a little bit every day and then later put it together, but just spew it all out, fill as many pages as you can or type as much as you can. There's always time and a place for editing and trying to pull things out. It's a football analogy, and I probably not going to register with everybody, but there was this fellow that went to school here called Dick Butkus. He was very famous, went on to be a famous Chicago Bear, and he said he would just grab everybody and then toss them out until he got to the guy with the ball. And it's the same way with a piece of writing. You just get it all out there and then start pulling out the pieces that don't make sense, that don't help build the story or move the story or define the poem. And just take those out, and that's editing in a nutshell. But let's get back to finding out, how and when and where, what we want most, but what we use worst. Any guesses? How about time? According to William Penn, yeah, that William Penn from way back when, started or found Pennsylvania and probably university and all that. Time is our best friend and our hardest dragon to tame. We all have plenty of it. I always think, I don't have any time for writing, but in reality, I may not be using my time the best way. And it just comes down then to prioritizing what's important to me, what's important to you, the things that interrupt us so much. So right before we started, I remembered to put my phone on Do Not Disturb and put it in my backpack. And I should leave it there for a week, but that's probably not going to happen. And the thing that will help us find that time is to make writing, develop a habit of writing. And habits are hard to keep, they're easy to break and hard to form and maintain. Does anybody have a writing schedule or routine or habit that they feel good about? That they feel bad about? Me too. There was a movie a few years back, probably 20 years back, called Smoke. It was on VHS, so that's how old it is. But the movie was titled Smoke with William Hurt, and he ran a cigar shop. And it's an okay movie, but one of the side plots, a customer who came to the cigar shop went out every day at the same time at 2 p.m. They were either in Philly or New York, some big city. But he went out and took a photograph at exactly 2 o'clock of this same intersection every day. And then at a later point in the movie, he's going back looking at these photographs, and you see the change of time and and the seasons and who's there on one day and who's not there on the next. And so I tried that once. I thought, well, that'd be a great way to journal. And so I set a reminder every night at 7 o'clock. I was going to go write for 5 minutes, and at least 5 minutes. And at first it went pretty well. I was doing like 10, 15 minutes, filling up some pages. After a couple of weeks, it was like, all right, it's 7 o'clock again. What can I write about? And so I stopped. But I need to start that again. So that had a trigger, a good habit. A good way to make a habit is to define a trigger, an action, and a reward. So in that case, my trigger was to write at 7 o'clock. If morning works better for you, you can set a trigger of, I'm going to get up 15 minutes early, which everybody says, and that's in my opinion, a terrible way to start. You want to work it into something you've already got established, because bedtimes and waking times are not always flexible. But find your trigger, whether it's a time of day, in the morning, in the evening, at lunch. Now that we're all wired, you have a phone or a watch, you can set that alarm on. And then choose an action. Is it going to be a number of minutes, number of pages, number of lines if you're writing a poem? Set some goal for that action, and then find a reward for it. and rewards are highly subjective, but try to be healthy. Don't make it ice cream every day or chocolate. But and it can either be daily or long term. If you can say, okay, well, weekends are out because I've got kids or parents or family I need to take care of. So there's 5 days in a week, generally 4 weeks. So if we got 20 weekdays, if I can get some writing done on 15 of them, then maybe I'll get a scoop of ice cream. Others may have more internal rewards, just knowing that you got it done, being able to mark it off either mentally or actually physically on a calendar and say, yes, I did this, I feel good about it, then that will help you develop that habit. Sounds simple, but there's always a trick or a catch. How long must this go on? That's an old song, Working in the Coal Mine. That line comes up a lot. But researchers have analyzed this, and I got a note in there of who it was, but I've misplaced it. But a study was done, and they said if someone's trying to establish a habit by doing a thing the same, doing it every day, it could range anywhere from 18 to 254 days before it like really soaks in. But the good news is the average time was only 66 days. So 2 months, if you start now, you can be writing full time in September. That seminar costs $2,000. So I don't have a seminar. That was a joke. So I know. Anyway, just find what works for you. Try to develop that. Another big piece of that is finding a place to write. How many of you have not necessarily dedicated, but a place that you write most often? A desk, kitchen table, on the couch, whatever works for you. With laptops, they're mobile. I start everything longhand, so I could write anywhere, but I usually try to stick to just 2 or 3 places in my house. And that works for me. I've got a composition notebook, old school like that, and also a fancy journal my sister got me that I use sometimes. And then sometimes if I'm not at home, I just grab whatever I can and write on it. I try to carry something very portable everywhere I go. So I've got something I can, if I see something or think of something, no matter where I am, I can capture that at the moment, because when I was younger, like you people's age, I think, I'll remember that. And then I never did. So be prepared. Keep some paper handy and a pen or pencil handy at all times. Get that, even if it's just a couple of words, get that thought down. And then when you get home, you can get to your own creation station. And I hope the podium's not in the way, but it's a place that you want to write. Does it work for you? Does it allow you to focus? Do you need this sign for your family? Do not disturb. I don't know if you can read the small print. Except in case of emergency. If you are on fire and only I can rescue you, or the apocalypse has started. That may not have aged so well. And then the FAQs. How's it going? Good. What are you doing? Stuff. How's stuff going? Good. Any questions so far? All right, next let's talk about family. Most of us have family that either we live with or are in frequent contact with, and they're good at being family. They're not necessarily good at respecting boundaries or letting you be the artist that you are destined to be. So sometimes they're gonna intrude. They're gonna try to break your focus, not intentionally. They're not deliberately, in most cases, trying to derail you, but you do have to be mindful of that. And family relationships can be complicated. I'd read one quote that I couldn't find, so I just have to paraphrase that. If you write about your family, you're likely to upset them, but if you don't, you'll disappoint them. So it's tricky and sticky and messy, but Anne Lamott, fantastic writer. If you're not familiar with her stuff, please check it out. But you own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories, and if people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better. Of course, it's a little bit snarky, but it's your story, your experience, your life. So you've got to put it out there. And if your vulnerability makes them vulnerable, then maybe there's a pathway to healing, or at least finding some common ground. Now let's talk about writing itself. So what is good writing? If you just Google that question, you'll get bunches of lists. And one list said voice, ideas, presentation, conventions, organization, word choice, sentence fluency. Another said gripping plot, memorable characters, good pacing, satisfaction, emotional engagement, effective ending. Could be any of those, could be none of those. It's very subjective. When people write, when I write, and I'll say, oh, this is no good. But I'm apparently a terrible appraiser of my own writing, because things I think are garbage have been published, things I thought were great have been rejected many, many times. So it's hard to find to be an objective critic of my own writing. What do you think makes anybody want to volunteer what they look for when they're reading something that's been written? What really makes you think, oh, I wish I wrote that, or I want to write, I like that, I want to do that?
I think things that connect personally with me, like a connection of, oh, I know what that feels like, oh, I've experienced that, or I could imagine that.
Yes. That ability to convey an experience, taking it from an individual to another individual, is magic. It's golden.
I really like great character development when the characters are very human. They're not like all good or all bad, and I can then relate to that as well. With yes, I got shortcomings here, but that doesn't mean I'm all bad. And so relatable to that, but also enjoying the character arc. I think is one of my favorites.
That ability to convey, because I wanted to be a fiction writer. I really did. But my stories read like outlines, and I'd turned to poetry to bring more imagery to my fiction, and never went back. But even in I don't know, the heaviest good versus evil stories and books and even movies that are out there, realizing that nobody is purely good, purely evil, and everybody's got some of both in it. And that helps me relate to the characters also, because I know I'm not necessarily pure good or pure evil, and we're all somewhere in the middle. So find what you like, what draws you in, and then see if you can just build that, what am I saying? Just make it stronger. Take what you like out of a story and focus on it, build it out to make it even stronger, bring your own experiences in there, and just go. Don't hold back. Other thoughts on good writing is that it startles, provokes, or makes people curious. Doesn't tell you what to think or feel. I like that aspect of it, where they're going to present, the author is going to present a scenario, but they're not going to, don't hit me over the head and tell me how this should make me feel. So when you write, you want to leave that opening so that the reader can bring in their own space, the back door. I have someone coming around. We say that with poetry a lot also, that only half the poem is on the page. The other half is what the reader brings in, their own experience. And that works on a bigger level with stories and novels as well. It just takes longer to get there. But and you could say that about any piece of work, that it is a collaboration between the artist and the receiver of the art. Henry Miller, for older folks, was a writer, as you know, or probably know. Anyway, he was in Paris in the 40s, I think, and wrote a lot about there. But he was, I don't know, he had a few books published, but he was very prolific. He wrote a lot and got stuff out there. And he always said, the work is its own reward, and that is the fact. That helps develop that writing habit. This friend of mine in the Northwest, Kelly, is a poet, and POBiz is what we call the business of poetry, the submitting part, the publication, the cutthroat nastiness of it. And this applies to all writing, but POBiz is gross commodification of art. Write your poems, submit them, or don't, just enjoy it and live your life. Same with the stories. If you're writing fiction, write them, read them, share them, send them out, or don't. As long as the writing is its own reward, then you don't need that external validation. It's nice to be recognized once in a while, but it's not going to change your life. Poetry is not a career, it's a lifestyle, a life's work, a practice. Same with fiction writing, any type of writing. And then as she closes, the minute you start worrying about status awards and where you are is the minute it becomes unfun, and that will break your habit faster than a criticism or a nasty word from someone who says, I don't get it. Let's talk a little bit about those works, about writing your story or your poem. When I started, I was a little bit concerned about this business. So I had a bunch of poems written that I thought were pretty good. I was going to start sending them out for publication. So there are literary journals you can go send them to, or you can enter contests. But I was doing more just journal submissions. There were a ton of magazines. It was early internet. Most of them were print and some were going online. But my name, if you don't remember from the beginning, is Jim O'Brien, and my full name is James Michael O'Brien. And about third of the Irish phone book is James Michael O'Brien. So I tried all combinations, couldn't find anything, and I was at home. I'm looking at our bookcase, and there's this big coffee table book of the life and drawings of M.C. Escher. And my dad was a big M.C. Escher fan. He had a couple Escher portraits up in his house. And then on my maternal his mom had some Dutch, we had a lot of Dutch folks marry into the family. And I thought, oh, well, that kind of works. So I'm going to use James Escher. And I wrote up an artist statement that, you know, there's some Dutch in my family. I love Escher's work. And on my best day, I would hope to have just a fraction of the depth of his artwork. Is anyone not familiar with M.C. Escher art, drawings, linotypes and stuff? Very complex, often illogical. Very famous of one shows a four-corner building with water running, but it is running, it looks like it's going downhill, but it stops where it starts again. So the water's running uphill or downhill. He's got another famous drawing of two hands drawing each other. So anyway, I'm like, well, that's great. I like that. I like that layer in writing, whether it's poems or stories, something I've written, something I've read. A lot of writing workshops I've been in, they've said, you know, you've got to keep peeling the onion. Have you ever heard that one before? Get more depth in your writing. And I always thought, well, yeah, that makes sense. But then, this is July. Last month, I was in a workshop, and the instructor said, you know, onions are nice, but when you peel an onion, when you get inside the onion, all you have is more onion. So think about a peach, where you can peel a peach and eat through some peach, some satisfying, delicious fruit, and then in the middle you've got a seed for another peach tree. So that's onion versus peach, and I like that a lot. I like to think that when you get down into something, you find something fresh, something new, something that's going to help you see things in a new way. And so I wrote a poem, It Happens. I don't know if you can read this very well, so I will read it, even though you can read it faster until you get to the part that's blocked by the podium. I wrote this a couple months ago. A friend of mine had his gallbladder out, right, or gallstones. They take out the gallbladder. He had the gallbladder out, and then we didn't see him. We didn't know what was wrong with him because he was putting these cryptic messages. I'm at the hospital. We're like, holy cow. And then he's like, no, they just took out my gallbladder. I'm fine. Well, that's great. So then when we got together at the next open mic, I wrote this poem for him. It's called Ode to My Appendix. For 24 years, it was just a part of me. And then one day it wasn't. I was feverish, sick with dry heaves into the night. 1986 diagnosis convinced me it was appendicitis. I felt well enough in the morning to stop into the restaurant I worked at and place the supply order. My boss said, don't do this to me, thinking I was hungover. I drove myself to the hospital and checked in through the ER. After an exam, they put me in a bed, moved me ahead of some other person's story. I called my family and they came. I asked my sister to feed the meter. She couldn't believe it, but she did it. Long after it was over, they tore down the hospital. The last thing left were volunteer tulips on the empty lot. I always wanted to go dig some up, but never did. I've moved at least 8 times since then, so it wouldn't matter. But when I see blue tulips, I still think of my appendix and wonder what else there was that I didn't need. That was, of course, Burnham Hospital right up the road here in Champaign, and it's long gone. But when they tore it down, there were these flower pods, and they had blue tulips, which I later discovered aren't really a thing. Yes?
I got my appendix out last week, so.
Congratulations. Definitely. Definitely. Wow. Oh, not the fireworks you were hoping for. No. Very nice. So I hope that that comes off more of a peach than an onion, because it's got a little, the ending is very different from the beginning. You've got tulips and thinking about what you needed or didn't need. Those endings, it doesn't have to be like O. Henry level in fiction where you just have a surprise ending and throws everybody off. Although The Gift of the Magi is a wonderful story, but if you read a lot of his stories, then it starts to get a little repetitive. So anyway, that's my peach for you all. So I feel like, who is that? Carrot Top. Like I'm reaching in this cabinet, but all I keep bringing out is coffee and water. If you don't know, Carrot Top is a comedian who uses a lot of props. My only props, coffee and water. So let's talk about not just writing, but living a creative life, keeping that creative mentality in everything you do, or as many things as you can. We have day-to-day activities, we've got jobs, we've got kids, parents, family that we all have to deal with. But in some of those, you can bring some fancy, some wit, some fun into all of it. I call it fun because for me, I think for most people, there's another old saying, if it doesn't entertain the writer, it's not going to entertain the reader. If I don't like it, if it doesn't surprise me or trigger an emotion in me, it's probably not going to register with many people at all. So that's great, but then you can also try to do that in real life. I try to connect with people when I meet them, think about what they're thinking, talk about what they're thinking about. And I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm going to try it anyway. So you can do that like with grocery lists. I used to think, oh, I'm so clever, because I would write my grocery list in the order of where the stuff is in the store. But then I realized, well, every grocery store is like that. It's frozen to grocery. No, it's produce to grocery to frozen to the door. Cards and letters. I don't have a pen pal right now, but, because I let that go. I had one in Effingham, but it was in the before times and everybody got busy. So, but write stuff down, write to people. Guest book notes. This is a note that I left. My wife and I, look at that, 7 years ago this week, I guess. Yep, so, right. So in 2015, we went, because our wedding anniversary is July 19th. So we rented a cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains, had a fantastic stay. And then when we left, like, oh, are we going to do the guest book? Because we don't always like to do those. But we did. I said, okay, I want to do one. And I'm going to read it to you, unless you guys can all read it from there. Should I read it? Yeah. Okay. Herbert and Kathy were the owners. We enjoyed our stay at Yellow Creek very much. We made the most of the peace and quiet. We loved the look and feel of the cabin, being on the creek, seeing the mountains, catching a fish or three with my fly rod, having a picnic blanket and cooking hot dogs over the open fire. In the twilight, we split cooking our meals between the firing and the charcoal grill. In the mornings, we eat breakfast on the deck. The horseshoe and bags games we never got to, but the pits look very nice. Sorry, it's smaller on my screen than yours. So, tra-la-la, that's a guest book note. Read the first word of every line going down. We made love on a blanket in between the horseshoe pits. I know, I'm sorry. It's a family show. So, just find places to amuse yourself. And if nothing else, you'll have a nice secret or some fun. So, yeah. I talked earlier about focus. Does anybody find themselves multitasking when they're writing or doing anything else? Multitasking is the worst, I've come to believe. And I just saw an exercise in a book called 51 Mind Hacks for a Writer. I think the idea was you do one every week, but you get a week off somewhere. If you have pen and paper, you can do this, or think about it and do it at home. So, if you were to take a pen and paper and time yourself, so you would need a pen or pencil, some paper, and your watch or some type of stopwatch. You're going to write across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 through 10, and then on the bottom, A through J. It's going to take like 3-4 seconds because you're doing one at a time. Now go back and write 1, then A, then 2, then B, then 3, then C, then 4. It's going to take at least twice as long. I mean, we're still only talking about 6-7 seconds, but it's the idea that not only with this one, you have to physically move your hand from one line to the next, but you also mentally have to jump. You've got to go, okay, numbers and letters, the numbers and letters. So that's all I have to say about multitasking is don't do it if you can avoid it. If you're going to write, if you're using your computer, go into airplane mode, shut down the socials, put your phone in your backpack, and just dedicate that time. You've got a creation station, you got a place to write, take some time and give that time to yourself. Put the sign on the door, make sure everybody's fed, and tell them, I just need a half hour. Sources of inspiration. Vocabulary is very important, although I've probably only used a couple hundred different words up here. Wordle has everybody seen Wordle? No, okay, it's a free game that's online. It's a 5-letter word, and you guess what it is, but you only get 6 tries to try to get it right. So it's a good way of looking at language and identifying letter patterns, and I think it does help with vocabulary. There's another one that we do called Spelling Bee, also from the New York Times, but I think that one has a cost. I think my wife snuck in a subscription and didn't tell me, but it's one where you have 7 letters and you make as many words as you can. There's free versions of all of those. Also, like daily emails that you can subscribe to. There's Word a Day. There's the Writer's Almanac, which was really popular, and then Garrison Keillor got in some trouble for being Garrison Keillor, and I guess it's back now, though. I always liked it because he'd have a couple anecdotes about famous writers or famous writing or history, and then he'd read a poem, and then the more poets I got to know, the more I realized he didn't pay any of them for them, so, that's that for Garrison. So I don't subscribe anymore, but I know people who still do. But where do you guys go for fun stuff? If you want to, do you have favorite Go ahead. Obstruction?
I was stretching.
Oh my goodness. That's a good idea. We should all stretch. It's been 45 minutes. So stretch your body, stretch your mind. I know I was just griping about social medias, but I do follow a lot of writers on Twitter. A lot of them are on Facebook also. And once you follow a couple, more start popping in. I'm starting to think, and I was thinking of this driving over, I haven't worked it into any formal paper or even written it down, but I'm starting to think that there is no more free will or destiny. I think everything is algorithms. Because when you follow one poet, then you start getting other ones showing up in your feed. Follow one novelist, you get others showing up in your feed. I think predetermination and free will are out the window, and that AI has finally taken over. But do any of you get email digest or listservs or anything that, or people you follow on, what's that, the TikTok? Writers of Instagram. That's good. I forgot about Instagram. So as far as poets, there's a lot of Instagram poets out there. And that people used to say that as an insult, but, and that's because, now I'm gonna bad talk poetry for a minute, and it might apply to other writing, but there's a lot of gatekeeper mentalities out there through definitely in poetry, and some probably in literary journals also. But Instagram really has helped break that down. So if you are putting quality work out on Instagram, it's going to be recognized for what it is, which is good writing. Even though we also said that is an unanswerable question and subjective. What else? Anybody subscribe to the newspaper here? There's a Champaign News Gazette. Or you heard of it? They run a weekly poetry column, although it wasn't in this past Sunday because they ran out of space. American Life and Poetry that old white dude Ted Kooser had started, and now Cowboy Alexander's taken it over, and he's doing great. He's got a lot of youthful energy and bringing in more diverse poets. And the Gazette's still printing that, which makes me happy. And they also print a haiku every week. Haiku, if you don't know, a very short poem, 3 lines. You can get, they used to tear off haiku a day calendars because they're so short you could put one on a page. But the Gazette still prints that every week too. And if you are interested in that, check them out. Any questions? A share.
Mr. O'Brien, what type of works have you written, and what was your inspiration to write?
I write poetry, nothing but poems, well, mostly poems, and guest book notes. I started writing poetry when I was about 27, 28. I had a very extended adolescence, hence the 1986 appendix occurrence where my boss thought I might just be hungover, but I was actually having appendicitis. So I started getting my act together around 28, 29, wrote some poems, and then got married and had a daughter, and then spent some time as a single parent. So then I didn't really get into it couldn't dedicate myself to it until she got to the end of high school, and when she went to college, I was able to start the CU poetry group here in town. I had taken a bunch of lit courses in college, been to a lot of workshops, realized that not everything can be taught in a classroom, that most of it is from sharing. And that's why I appreciate you all being here today so that we can share some experiences. All it takes to be a writer is to write. Writers write, that's it. No MFA, you don't need to be a professor or a PhD, you just need to write. Find what's inside you that somebody else can relate to and write it down. And that's what inspires me. When I can write a poem that connects with one other person, whether it's just because they had their appendixes out in the last year or anything else, then that makes me very happy.
I have a question.
Yes.
Did you study any foreign languages? I mean, would that have some influence on your writing?
Sheila asked if I'd studied any foreign languages. I had a couple years of Spanish in high school. It would absolutely help writing to know a second and third and fourth language, because the structure, the syntax is so different that helps you make your own writing more interesting and engaging. So highly recommend it. Also recommend, if you are if you find yourself start to feel that you're not necessarily in a rut, but you're using the same words over, then look at, we're here at the library. They've got everything here. Go find a Psychology Today magazine or a Popular Science magazine and just sit down and look at an article and get these other terminologies into your head and work those into your stories. One of my most successful poems won a contest in Kentucky, and it's called The Universe Before the Breakup. And it was about a breakup, but I brought all of these astronomical terms into it. And that gave it a little more depth than if I had just said, yes, I knew she was going to leave me and this wasn't going to work out. So we talked about orbits and galaxies, and so find terminology that's outside of your normal comfort zone and see about working that in. A couple of years ago in CU Poetry, we also did an exercise where we went to, we found, I guess most of it was online. Someone had a book, but most of it was online. Find something in another language and just copy that page out of a book, totally random. Ideally, something in it could be anything, but if it's in, and I'm terrible with the taxonomy, but like the Russian languages that don't have the Roman letters that we're familiar with, so the Romance languages, if it's French, English, Spanish, copy that out, ideally if a language you don't know, and then try to translate it without knowing the actual words, but follow the patterns, and then take it where you think you want to go with it. Go where it takes you. So, like, I wouldn't do Spanish because I know too much of Spanish. I'd be able to say, oh yeah, this is how you put together an IKEA table. But if it was French or Italian, other than anything I've seen on a menu, I have no idea what they're talking about. And those are good exercises because they help you develop that new syntax and new structures for your writing, because you don't know what the original was about, but if you try to follow those patterns, so if it's a long word, you know to put a long word in there. If it's shorter, then you want to put in a preposition or a conjunction, and then you can try to figure out the pattern. That's a good exercise. I need to do that one again. Next generative workshop, we should roll that out. Yeah, highly recommend a second language.
I'm kind of excited. I signed up for a Latin class that Parkland is offering to the community.
Really?
6 weeks. So I'm really excited about that, to get to the roots.
Yeah, so Parkland's offering a 6-week class in Latin if you want to get to the root languages. My daughter majored in classical studies in Latin and ancient Roman language. Here's another exercise. So initially I had this as a clip, but it may run into some, we didn't want to run into any intellectual property issues, or copyright issues, but I'm going to read it anyway rather than show it. It's from an old television show called The Office. Anybody remember that? There was a scene. There was an episode called Grief Counseling, and somebody had passed away, which of course is really sad, but it's a sitcom, so they made it funny. So they had this scene where everybody got together and they wanted the manager, fellow named Michael Scott, wanted people to share a story of their own personal loss. And one of the characters, he had this ball they would throw around. If throw you the ball, you tell your story. So one of the characters, Ryan, who is played by B.J. Novak, who wrote half the episodes and has a hilarious book. Anyway, he caught the ball and then tells a story that is actually the plot of The Lion King. But Michael didn't catch on, but somebody else did. And so then this other character catches it, and he tells Weekend at Bernie's, which was another movie from that era. But he made it so obvious that the boss finally caught on. But that's something that you can do in a playful way, either with yourself in a journal or with friends. Take a plot line from a story or movie and just retell it in 2 or 3 lines as if it was your own experience, and hilarity will ensue, or you'll not be invited back. Could be either. And that is as close to a prompt as we're going to get for today. Any other questions? Or not questions? Just tell me what you're thinking.
Can I ask a question about the forming a habit of writing?
Yes.
It really sounds like a good idea. In my former life, I was a musician, so I know about practicing, how important it is to practice every day. But somehow I view practice like a habit like that, of more like the technical honing. But then there was that time when I played, and it was that creative, that expressive type of thing. So I'm like, okay, is the habit of writing the technical, like practicing of your writing skill, and then you write when you feel that creative inspiration come?
Yeah. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't have a habit, and so I'm wondering, okay, how does that work?
Right. So, are you in any type of writers group, or have other people that you write with or share your work with?
I have a page on Facebook, but that doesn't really get you real
Right.
feedback. I mean, people will comment every once in a while, but
Yeah.
not real.
So when we had a weekly workshop, for me, the writing and the editing and revising is all like the practicing, and then when I would read it out loud to people would be like the performance. We have this monthly open mic at Rose Bowl you can always come to and make a performance there. But in a non-performative, are you writing fiction, poems, stories?
Stories.
Yeah. So I think the writing, the revising, the rewriting and re-revising is the practice. piece, and then when it's finally where you're happy with it, make a YouTube video, read it into a video and post it somewhere, and that would be your performance. And if you set a goal to do that, if you say, well, I want to record one story a month, or I don't know what your time frame might be, but that may help you establish that habit rather. If you're inclined to that. And if you don't want to put it online or out there, then just knowing that it's done and moving on to the next one. With poems, they say, are poems ever really done, or are they just abandoned? Because you can revise a poem over and over again, which I'm very guilty of. And so I've got a whole stack of poems that are printed out that are basically done, but then if I share them with someone and they say, well, think about this, and I might revise it again. Personally, I stop revising. If it's been published, then it's done. I'm not touching it again. But yeah, that's an interesting concept of equating that to music. Because like anybody, I love to sit in and watch a musician practice. The tuning, the learning, hearing the scales, the arpeggios. Is that how they say that? Sorry. But then when it comes to writing, all you hear is a pen going across the page, and nobody wants to watch that. But you can do it. Keep at it. And I'll be everybody's cheerleader in any way I can. I support you as writers. You can do this. You can reach out to me anytime if you get stuck and say, I'm done, I'm burning my papers, I'll talk you down. It may not be much help beyond that, but I'm here for you. Anyone else?
How do we contact you?
Oh, you can't. No. I've got contact info. I probably have some of it with me. Sorry. Did you have a share? Sorry.
I have some trouble, like, when I have an idea, I have trouble sticking to that idea beyond, say, a few lines or something like that. And then my mind moves on to a different idea that's not probably very related to what I'm trying to write at the current moment. So, do you have any tips about how to stick to one idea at a time while writing?
No, keep them all. Keep them all. So I don't know if this will help you or not, but when I'm working on a poem, I get the first draft done. I always do the first draft longhand, and then I'll do a little revising, and then usually put it in the computer and print it up, and then put it in my pocket and carry it around for a couple days or a week or as long as it takes. And I think you might try this with that. If you have just a couple lines of an idea and you're stuck with that, get a paper copy of it, whether you just tear that sheet out of your notebook or type it and print it, and carry that with you, and so that it's with you, but you're not necessarily thinking about it. And you can move on to the next one or the one before that. But always keep those balls in the air like a juggler, and eventually something will click with one, and you're like, okay, I know what I wanted to do with that one now, or the path has appeared. You know, that's another old saying from the Artist's Way book: leap, and the net will appear. So sometimes you just have to take an idea and let it germinate a little bit, but still be aware of it. Not abandon it like I was taught, not like a poet. Don't abandon those, but develop them, give them time to develop, and hopefully something will come out of it. And Sheila had asked how to get a hold of me. I'll give everyone my email address here. Any last thoughts, questions, complaints? Wide open.
Just thanks for sharing all your knowledge.
thank all of you for being here, and it's a pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. A big thank you to Jim. As always, really helpful and applicable advice. Just a reminder, we will be back in this room next Wednesday, July 20th at 7 p.m. And that will be for How to Beat Writer's Block with local author John Milas. So we hope you can join us. See you next week.